This is the I Am a Mainframer podcast, brought to you by the Linux Foundation's Open Mainframe project. Episodes explore the careers of mainframe professionals and offer insights into the industry and technology. Now, your host, Stephen Dickens.
Hello and welcome to another episode of I'm a Mainframer. I'm Stephen Dickens, your host, and I'm joined today by Gary Thornhill from PopUp Mainframe. Hey Gary, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me on. Really interested to join the podcast, so thank you.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this one since we started talking about booking it. You and I have been working together a little bit over the last few months. But what we're doing today is we're getting out of the corporate world and we're telling the Gary Thornhill story. So Gary, tell us a little bit about your role at PopUp and then we'll dive straight in.
Yeah, so at PopUp Mainframe, I'm the CEO and founder as well. So I guess everything that comes with running a tech startup. I'm also heading commercial at the moment, but hopefully that won't be too much longer. I'll be able to bring somebody in that can run that for me who really knows what they're doing, so I can look at the broader picture.
So, Gary, as I say, we're stepping out of the sort of corporate world. We'll get to the pop-up story a little bit later in the story arc. But tell us a little bit about your background. As I say, you and I have been working together the last few months over a beer, over those conversations. It's been fascinating to kind of understand your journey and how you get to be CEO of a startup. So tell us the story. Tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, interesting. So I didn't really have any plans to ever be in IT. So my father worked for IBM for eons and started his career changing light bulbs in massive computers in the 50s. So, you know, IBM was a theme all the way through my childhood, and I wasn't drawn to it at all. So I went to university and got a degree in economics. And by that time, I'd been in full-time education. So I basically took 2 years out and went backpacking. And went to all sorts of places and had adventures, which was fantastic. So then I was completely skint and needing to get a job.
Kicked in, right?
Yeah, and funny enough, because I qualified, although I went to a good university, I only got a 2.2, and it was difficult at that time. 2.2, I guess, is a very average degree, sort of averaging 50%, because I enjoyed myself at university.
A little too much by the sound of it.
Yeah, scrape through. So then you're in the, sort of your CV's just thrown in. And I struggled to get a job. And I was sort of saved by my older brother because he was working at IBM. And they needed grads in operations. And, I was IT literate and I had an interview. And then all of a sudden, very quickly, I found myself working at operations in IBM North Harbour in Portsmouth. So, and by that time...
And that's a big site for people who don't know it globally. North Harbour for IBM has always been one of those big locations, big IT infrastructure there, or there was at least.
It was IBM headquarters, really, of operations outside London of South Bank. So, there was a lot of people there when I started in 98. Mm-hmm. And then, I just, because I hadn't worked, I never had a proper job. But I'd done so many part-time jobs, you wouldn't believe it. So I've always been good at turning my hand at whatever to work. So I had the work ethic. And actually, it was I never really knew what to expect, but I went for it. And, and just, it was really interesting. My role was really interesting because they just created something called SAP Ops, where it was sort of a front-end SAP fulfillment system and mainframe back-end. So as an operator, I was doing three things. I was doing system operations, batch operations, and also Linux. Sorry, not Linux. It was Solaris at the time, I think. AIX.
Mm-hmm.
But so I went straight into having to learn all these three different roles. And I think that served me well later on, that I was never pigeonholed thinking I only do mainframe. So
you always had a bit of a sort of breadth and a sort of sideways look into other things in the industry.
But I did have a baptism of fire because literally I arrived on the Monday, did 5 days of MVS mainframe courses of all these things with all these acronyms that were horrendous, as we know in IBM, right? You know, it was a
IBM just like a 3-letter acronym. Let's put it that way.
yeah, it was a mind melt. And then sort of a week later, I'm there at 4 o'clock in the morning trying to fix batch jobs with JCL and by that, in those days, you had to use manuals. So it all looked a bit gobbledygook, and look, if you're thrown into something, you have to learn quickly. So, and very quickly, I came out of that and went into and became an operation analyst. So that another team wanted me, and I sort of moved out of that quite quickly and became an operations analyst at IBM.
Okay, so now you're at IBM.
Mm.
You've kind of landed. Just this the family connection. You're into the workplace. You've got a proper job. Let's call it that.
Yes.
What's next? So you're in the mainframe. You've gone through this 5-day intensive course. What's next?
What's next?
Tell me the next sort of segment of the story, if you would.
Yeah. I guess I learned so much so quickly, and it was really exciting. And we was deploying an internal application called Partner Commerce, and it had bits of DB2, IMS, Kicks, and MQSeries, something I really liked. I really was drawn towards MQSeries. So as I was working shifts still, I managed to save up a lot of money. So I thought I was a bit of maybe a less risk-averse person than some people, but I left IBM, went backpacking for 6 months around South America, and took in a trip to Antarctica and the Galapagos Islands and fulfilled some dreams, and then came back and got a job working for UBS Warburg in the city with my broad mainframe experience, and particularly around MQSeries. So I wanted to, I was ambitious and thought, working in banking was the way to go. So I did that quite early on in my career, thinking that would be a great place to learn. And actually, it wasn't. It was horrendous.
Okay.
Yeah, it was actually a really negative part of my career, actually.
Okay, so why was that? What was the kind of, was it just the environment? Was it the technology? Was it?
So it's a really good question. It wasn't the technology. The technology was really good because I was running in the build team as I was doing multiple things. The actual role was quite good, and we were running Java workloads on the mainframe.
Mm-hmm.
Actually quite tricky. So getting into the USS, doing the build from into there. And
that would have been not cutting edge, but it would have been early days for running Java on Unix system services back in the day.
Yeah, 2001, 2002. So it was.
That would have been early days for that technology, really.
Yeah, and I'd already seen some MQSI as well on. So I'm using what is message broker services then. I was also looking at that as well. So I think it was always good that I was at the cutting edge. Where I struggled in the banking side of things then was actually, it's people. I realised how good IBM was a place to start your career and learn, and very supportive. There were a lot of very clever, decent individuals in IBM that you were supported. They did, nurture and manage people properly. And there's a really good IBM culture there. And I didn't realize how, it wasn't until I'd left and was working somewhere else that I didn't realize how important it was and how that helped me grow. So I actually not that I didn't learn anything, but that environment, and it's funny talking to other people who work for the same organization at the same time, depending on which department you're in and who's running it, depends what the culture is and how people behave. But it was actually quite a negative. Everybody was out for themselves. There was a lot of, if you don't work 70 hours a week, you're not going to get your bonus and things like that. So I found myself doing a lot of hours and being used and abused, really. And that was the sort of ethos and mentality that if you're young, you get, you're just sort of, in a sweatshop. And that was the experience. So whilst the technology was,
And that's coming back. I mean, we're seeing that with all the bankers' hours at the moment. That's kind of in the press. So it kind of ties to that, what we're still hearing, what's that, 20, 30 years later?
yeah. So it was, and see what happened, because it was a project. As soon as they'd got their money's worth, I was made redundant just before Christmas, so they didn't have to pay the bonus. So it was all very calculated, and that was and I learned something very important from that experience was when you work with a bank, you have to behave like one when you work inside one,
Mm.
and otherwise you get sucked up and spat out. And it felt a little bit like that. I didn't really. I mean, I wasn't at the time. It was just something that happened, and you're so young. You don't really things just happen to you when you're young, don't they? And you just
Yeah, you
get on
haven't
with
got the context to
it. No,
understand kind of what it means.
no. So I was out of work for about 6 months, and then I actually got a job working for Argos, then the GUS brand,
Yeah.
Milton Keynes, and there, and it was a great place to work, and I tell you why, because it was there was 4 floors in the building in Avebury and Milton Keynes for the whole business, and at that time Argos was a very successful business. Obviously,
Hmm.
internet came along, but I think they've recovered nicely, which I'm really pleased about. Um, but because everything was self-contained in one building and it wasn't an international business, any project and all the IT sat on one floor, and I got a job as a middleware consultant because I had strong MQ experience.
Hmm.
They wanted someone who could do MQ on ZOS, which I could do, and I had a bit of distributed background from my, and from working in UBS. So I took a job as like an MQ consultant across all platforms. So we were doing ZOS, which I was specialist in, ZOS, sorry, and then AIX, Windows, AS400 as well. So
Yeah.
I became an MQ consultant across these multi platforms, and again, and that was really good because there was a really good, strong, caring team, and I learned to do things properly there. I'd started at IBM, been abandoned a bit or not really supported in UBS, whereas in Argos, the John Scott, who was very influential on me because he showed me how to do everything properly, and he taught. It was important for him to make sure that the people who worked for him did their job really well, so he could go and do other things. And to me, I learned something there, and so that was a really key thing. How that whole team was run, and a really lovely time for me actually.
Yeah.
As much as
Well, I mean,
I really
I
like.
think I think the takeaway from that, and we get a lot of younger listeners that listen to this show, is you're building your resume, you're building your career, and it's not going to be home run after home run after home run. It's not going to be perfect. You're not going to. You sounded like you got into IBM, great company for the early part of your career, got some good skills, then went to UBS, not so great, learned some good life lessons, probably didn't enjoy the experience, but learned some life
Yeah,
lessons. Then you land at Argos and you're back on the growth story from sort of getting more skills and being supported again. I think if I look at that entire segment, those 3 roles there, Gary, I see that as a net positive. Even the UBS piece and the way you described it, I think as these younger listeners are, if the job's not great, I've been fired from a company, made a part of a redundancy package, got laid off, company restructured. You just got to learn the lessons from that. It's not going to be all upward trajectory. It's all not going to be butterflies and rainbows and unicorns. Yeah, there's going to be some bad times, but what you've got to do is take that experience from that and layer it up. And what I'm hearing so far from those first 3 jobs is a real sort of layering up of experience. Maybe it's life experience, maybe it's technical experience, but that kind of builds that solid foundation.
exactly. And I would say, so I took a pay cut, a significant one, to go from between UBS and Argos, and so
Mm.
younger listeners, don't be scared to do that to get the right job, because it all comes back. if you've got the right skills and you know where you are. So I probably regressed a bit in, as you said, whereas I did a stint at Argos 2.5 years, I think, and then I went back into banking on a nice contract because I had the skills, and I'd also learned from my previous experience in banking that how to operate in a bank, how to behave. I didn't have the skills as a person to behave in that quite cutthroat industry. Whereas I did go and work for a nicer bank when I went back. Say who you'd say who you work for. Is that okay? I've already said it, so there's no point backtracking.
Yeah, keep going.
Yeah, I got a lovely job working at RBS, and just before they bought ABN AMRO, so in the retail bit, and it was very old fashioned. No, it wasn't old fashioned, but I mean, it was a massive mainframe department. I think they had more kicks regions than anyone else at RBS. So they had, the Ulster brands, NatWest. So, I went in there and did a change for actually integrating Ulster onto the mainframe platform. And so that was really, really interesting. And it was, I could bring everything.
Always been a well-run shop. I used to call on RBS. Always a well-run, well-structured, well-thought-through, balanced shop, I thought.
Yes, and because they handle 40% of UK clearing, mainframe is so massively important to them on their operation. So it does need to be watertight. And they did things quite conservatively. I'm sure they've massively changed now, like everybody else had. But, there was a 3-week lead time into a test LPAR to make any change. So, you had to plan well and do things. But it was a great time for me. And I really enjoyed working there. It was a really, so going from not working in London on a permy salary to getting a contract, although it wasn't a massive contract, it was, I did sort of 2.5 times my salary. And as someone in their 20s, that's exciting, isn't it? Being honest. And
it comes back to your point of if you invest, it pays forward.
Yeah. So probably at that time of my career, money was important, and just where I was. So that was a driver. But it was the guy that hired me was really good. Ahmed Hopper, who's quite big in mainframe circles. I think everyone knows Ed Hopper. So he looked after me. I only had one recruitment consultant, and he was really good to work with and took care of us. But that was really positive. And I then went from the retail bank and sort of advertised myself and said, because I had to work with from the retail bank to the investment bank, what was called GBM then, GBM RBS. They were doing MQSeries, let's call it very loosely, and not loosely. They didn't have an MQ consultant, and they had some really important MQ. So I said, because I was working with them, setting things up, I said, well, I should come over and work in the investment bank side, and I could do all these things for you and build you a failover cluster and blah, 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 blah. So I just sort of moved out from the retail and then into the investment banking. So then I found myself investment banking just before the RBS crash in 2008. So, and that was RBS was massive then. And it was the biggest bank in the world, wasn't it? So all of a sudden I found myself in the biggest bank in the world, managing the MQSeries for the whole organization, integrating ABN AMRO onto a new platform. So it was a really good time to be working. And I'll probably pause there.
So let's kind of wind forward from there. You're at RBS. Let's maybe get to the pop-up story now. Right. Let's join the dots up and how you got from there to sort of founding pop-up, because I think that last little bit of the journey before pop-up, and then we'll talk briefly about pop-up, and then we'll bring it home.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll accelerate on the next bit of how I got there. So in RBS, I and this is a core thing in my life. is I set all the MQ up and I automated it all. So I did myself out of a job. And it was a very strong platform and did it properly. And so I was very proud of what we built. And then I moved into project management because I found the way that projects run and the requirements that came to me was so frustrated. I just said, I want to run that project because I'll do it properly. I had no project management experience. So I paid for myself to go on a Prince project management course. So I did that, and unfortunately, my boss got moved on for other reasons. So, sort of 3 or 4 months later, I found myself program managing the development team, or heading up the middleware development team. So I stepped out of MQ, and I was running a middleware team. And one of the biggest problems that we had was how long it took to test. It was a manual testing cycle. It used to take about 6 weeks to run a regression test. So I sort of bought market leading software from, it was Green Hat at the time that IBM bought that software, and you could do all the test automation and integration level. So we managed over 2 years, we reduced the regression testing time down from 6 weeks to 3 hours. Really turn the handle. So just through that automation and moving early doors DevOps, and this is sort of 2010, 2011, the team grew massively as did RBS, and we were getting every single project because we could turn it around and deliver it and get it on. So there was lots of other messaging initiatives, but basically Global Message Hub was very successful because we had a test automation DevOps in there, and we had a fully mapped up process so we could do things quickly and at speed for the enterprise. So that was how I, that was the direction that I wanted to go in. And I was still contracting at the time, so it was a bit, do I get a full-time job or do I go somewhere else? And me being naive, thinking because I'd had such great success internally in RBS that I could then join a consultancy and be a miracle worker and sell, be successful and get all these other companies using it because it's a no-brainer why you wouldn't do test automation. Okay, why would you not invest in test automation and take massive cost out and improve your quality and accelerate time to market? That's obvious to me, right?
Yeah.
But then, so I went to work for I was working with a partner called Sandata at RBS, and they wanted to go in this direction. And so they brought me in as, I can't remember what I was called to start off with. But so the idea was to grow their consultancy by doing test automation and middleware, because that's where I'd come from. So I did. So that was in 2012 or 2013. And because I always know better than anybody else, I ended up as general manager, CEO quite quickly because I had a vision, I had a plan for the company. But to be honest, it was I had no sales experience. I had not been in the consultancy. I'd been IBM. I'd been on business for clients. So what I think they call me gamekeeper turned poacher. That was, so that was another baptism of fire, because doing things well in a company and translating that to be successful as a consultancy is so different and so difficult to prepare. But so I grew. So at Sandata, 2 themes: middleware, DevOps. Middleware is much better with DevOps. Do things quickly and test them, and then my mainframe experience came back in because no one was doing mainframe DevOps. So I took the company Sandata Technologies in that direction. And we always had our big existing clients, Vodafone, RBS, and we did really well in there. We were very sticky. And we did some excellent services. We had great people. As a smaller consultancy, you can't get away with stuff. You've got to be good, otherwise you're out on your ear. Because everything else is
no brand recognition. There's no kind of cachet. It's the quality of your people or nothing, basically.
Yeah. So so that was, but we did well. But trying to do mainframe DevOps was massively hard, and we didn't get that much success. And this was because there was, if you're trying to do new things, first of all, there's always a pushback of, why are you trying to do this? It works perfectly well like this, So there's always a pushback, and
People can't see the promised land.
yeah, and there's a little bit of job protectionism as well, I think, in mainframe land. And the other thing was that there was never any environments to do any work in. So if you were successful to sell something, then you then had to wait and get access, and then hopefully you might get a bit of an environment to set something up. So all those things put together, that we weren't commercially successful as doing mainframe DevOps as a consultancy, because no one was really ready for it. There was no environments to do it. And that led to, hang on a second, if we created a product that allowed us to have instantaneous environments at a fraction of a cost, maybe you can do new things and you can modernize the mainframe.
So that's the genesis story of PopUp then.
So that's how we did that. But it took COVID. So we did have, when I was still running CEOing Sendata at the time, COVID came along, and we basically lost all of our consultants. We were all pushed out in the UK very quickly, exited from Deutsche Bank, Royal Bank of Scotland, to save money because the world's going to end, right? First thing you do is cut your IT contractors or your consultants. But that meant we had the dream team in Sandata, where we could, people were there. So that's how we came up with PopUp Mainframe, because we've been using ZD&T for a while for a client we had working with BMC, and we used that to train on and do whatever. So we thought, well, hang on a second, if we could turn this into an appliance and have it ready very quickly, then this would solve the problem of trying to do your ideas in mainframe DevOps. So yeah, that's how PopUp was popped up out of COVID, actually. So.
Well, it's good. I mean, the good piece for that, and it's a couple of times we've talked about it already, the adversity leads to opportunity. So CEO of a consulting firm and all your consultancy contracts are cancelled, you would frame that as a bad day at the office, I think. And then from that, you don't frame it that way. You go, oh, well, all those experts now aren't doing client work. I've got them in the office. Let's put them to work to do something and create a problem, a fix to a known problem. But you probably just didn't have the time or the consultants.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting way to look at a bad day in the office when you're running a consulting firm, as if your consultancy contracts get cancelled. But you didn't frame it that way.
No, it was a bit, for me personally at the time, I had to remortgage my house to pay the mortgage. So we had to come up with something quite quickly in order to be successful. So, and it's amazing how, how situations happen. And as you say, I would always been someone who's, half empty glass rather than half full type, so it just meant that we could do something quite quickly, and that was really exciting. So I think you're driven. I think that's what happens, isn't it? What they call it, exogenous events, supply chain events create demand opportunities. If I go back to my economics degree.
Dust it off. So tell us just in a couple of minutes about PopUp. We've got that Genesis story there, and then we'll get into the final couple of questions and bring this home.
Okay, great. So so what we're doing now is, really what our drivers are as a business is that by supplying these what PopUp Mainframe is something that we can install in 10 minutes in on-prem and on the cloud on x86. So pretty much anyone can have their own mainframe, an individual, a team. They can be sized differently to meet any use cases. So, dev test so I should say we can only use PopUp Mainframe for dev test only. You can't use it for production workloads, but hey ho, there's a lot of dev test environments around, and it's there to do things quickly. So, you can solve the problem of getting more environments at lower cost, but all of a sudden you can work different ways and try new things out, and that could be installing a new version of DB2 and testing your full application. So it's all about encouraging agility accelerating time to market. And one of the most important things is because we have all DevOps stack software on it, either from IBM or BMC, a person can be productive without having any green screen mainframe experience. So this, as we've talked about, the democratization of access allows a whole new different set of demographies onto it, doing stuff quickly, highly productive. So that's really what we're trying to do here. And what we're also looking at now is we're looking to get a version. We've got a version on the PopUp Mainframe that can run on the IFL, on the physical and the integrated Linux facility, on the physical mainframe, and on Linux One as well. So now we're covering the full spectrum with these environments. So the idea being that you can spin it up on x86 on the cloud if you want, or you can do it on a Linux One or IFL and get more room on it. So but the whole principles work the same. And the other thing that we work with is very quickly is with a product called Delphix that's owned by Perforce, and this gives us 4D time travel where you can forward and rewind these dev test environments, and so that gives you super agility. And all of a sudden, what took hordes of people now could take a couple of heads to make change very quickly. But because you're doing it against a gold copy production copy, it's about having like you were testing in production, but fraction of a cost with obfuscated data. So that's how we're sort of changing the world with sort of new ways of working and bringing that in. So I would like to say that all this stuff is there, but it's like, how do you get to that elixir quickly? And so that's what PopUp's about. It's like you could develop this all in house, but do you want to be changing your business and making that and working your business, or does the client want to be cutting edge and trying to spend all of its money and time on IT when they could just get something awesome to just be there straight away? So that's what we're doing there, really.
I think this has been a known problem for a long time in the space. You guys have looked at it programmatically, looked at it, unpicked it from experience, and been able to go, I can fix that problem, and this is how we do it. So, got to start bringing this home, Gary. Okay. I can talk to you for hours. We do talk regularly for hours. Couple of questions I always ask of everybody on the show, and I'm fascinated to get your opinion, your perspective. First question is, what do you go back and say to 21-year-old Gary coming out of college with a degree? As I say, we have a lot of younger listeners for the show. We mapped a story arc there, and there were some ups and some downs.
Yeah.
You've got the opportunity to go back and speak to your younger self. What would you say?
Yeah, thought about this, and it jumped straight out of me. And I'm not a cynic, because trying to win new business, you can't be cynical, otherwise you just have to pack up and go home. But I realised from a couple of the, I guess, negative experiences, and just particularly how management works in banks, is that quite often decisions aren't made for the right technical reasons, and often they're in the self-interest of individuals. Right. Mm-hmm. I was always a purist of, you do this because this is the best way of doing it, and look at the technology and look how better it is. But that's not necessarily a recipe for success, because that could be treading on somebody else's territory and they won't do it. So, so you can get eaten up and spat out alive. So, and I think a lot of it's to do with who your manager is and are they supporting you? And I think the management is going to become more and more key of how people look after their employees, because some managers in my career just took all the kudos for themselves when you did anything good, and then they would ride on your coattails. But to me, it's about developing people. But look at, if you've got a brand new idea, be careful with it and work with the right people in the organisation to bring that out. So that would be my advice.
That's great advice. The other question I ask, and I get really good answers to this, so I keep asking it, and it's been a consistent on the show for years now. Where do you see the mainframe platform, say, 5 years out? We know a new box is coming. We know there's new versions.
So I've got a crystal ball here.
Bring the crystal. I need that crystal ball off you, because I asked this question of you've got a crystal ball, and you've actually brought a crystal ball.
You know, it's important I've got two, as you should have in this life, right? You know, so I can
Yin and a
carry
yang.
more. Yeah, exactly, yin and yang. So I want to
I
get
love it.
this question right.
That might be a bit heavier in your luggage to bring over the next time, rather than the bag of crisps you brought me over last
Yeah,
time.
this is a rose quartz crystal ball, actually. It's a very nice one. But yeah,
I like that. I like that.
yeah. So you can see my.
So let's peer into that crystal ball, and what do you see as the future, Gary?
Okay, so I put it down because my arms are getting tired.
Yeah, that looks heavy.
I think it's 7 kilos. But yeah, so and as talking about this today, but you know, I'm knowing where I see the future. There was always throughout my career, it's always been, oh, mainframes are finishing, and you know, or no one wants those, and what have you. But they stay there, and I know from the market, and actually, IBM are selling more mainframes than they ever have. And two key things: it's the compute, the resilience. I join those up together. That's why everyone knows that's the strength of the mainframe. That combined with the importance of sustainability. Now, the whole world has realised we all have to be more sustainable, and IT is really important. Just every time you press your phone and check your bank account, that does something for the world, doesn't it? In terms of climate change. So, you know, how can we get efficient on that? And the mainframe computers, Z16s, 17s, etc. They are by far the most ecologically beneficial for the world. That with the compute means I think mainframes will be selling more so than ever. And the key thing is that the challenge mainframe has is that the cost per transaction is low, but the cost to change at the moment is quite high because of the silo and different skill sets. So, and knowing what IBM are doing over the next few years of trying to make it a lot more easier to deliver for people to be a lot more productive on the mainframe. So I just see that, you know, that combination of factors will mean that mainframe is going to be so important. And because all of the tooling is there, that it just looks like anything else with GUIs and VS Code and what have you. You won't even know you're working on a mainframe, but it will just be the most efficient way for big business to deliver their business. So yeah, I see it booming. So maybe get some IBM stocks, guys.
This is not a stock advice show.
No,
Gary, I love the framing there of the cost per transaction is low, but the cost of change is high. If we can reduce that cost of change, then we get a fantastic platform. Gary, thank you for joining me on the show. Pleasure. We ran long. I decide on the length of the show dynamically based on the guests and how interesting they are. So take that as a compliment.
thank you.
You've been listening to another episode of the I'm a Mainframer podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Dickens. If you like what you hear, please click and subscribe, share it with your friends, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much for watching.
Thank you for tuning in to I Am a Mainframer. Liked what you heard? Subscribe to get every episode, or watch us online at openmainframeproject.org. Until next time, this is the I Am a Mainframer podcast. Insights for today's mainframe professionals.